The world's energy supplies have been massively disrupted by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Much of the West plans to completely cut out Russian gas and oil by the end of the year in a bid to defund Vladimir Putin's war machine. India, though, has continued to buy Russian oil at discounted prices despite pressure from the West. In this episode, we'll drill into why. But first, we start in Scotland, where the UK government believes the answer to the energy gap left by Russia could lie beneath the North Sea. The fossils of a once thriving North Sea oil industry have been left to rust in the Cromarty Firth in the northeast of Scotland. After decades of boom, the demand for oil slowly fell. So did the price. That left oil drilling platforms with no work. Now, these metal giants are scattered across the horizon, waiting to be either torn apart for scrap or repurposed. But that could be about to change. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has left the UK with a gap in its energy supply. It's also led to huge price rises and a skyrocketing cost of living. Prime Minister Boris Johnson hopes that increased drilling in the North Sea could provide the UK with more affordable energy, but that doesn't fit with his government's net zero emissions targets and the planned decommissioning of oil rigs by 2050. Could there be a revival, or has the sun set on the glory days of North Sea oil? The answer to that might lie 3 hours east in a remote corner of Scotland. I've come to the city of Aberdeen, often referred to as the oil capital of Europe. For decades, tens of thousands of people have been employed in the energy sector here, but how much does the city still rely on an industry which is gradually being phased out? Since 1970, Aberdeen's harbour has been a hub of fossil fuel production. The oil industry brought the city immense wealth, but fortunes have changed for many people here, alongside a drop in oil demand and in turn a fall in price. In 2016, 23% of its families were in fuel poverty, simply meaning they couldn't afford to pay their energy bills. Those latest official figures don't include the pandemic and spiralling energy costs. Many think the number is now much higher. Aber Necessities currently supports 300 families struggling to pay the bills each month. The charity supplies them with food, clothes, and other basic needs.
In the pandemic, we saw a 900% increase, and as we came out of the pandemic, we really hoped that things would slow down and calm down, but that's not been the case.
The current cost of living for a family of four without rent is $900 a month, forcing many people to make drastic decisions.
They're turning off their gas and electricity, they're not having showers, parents are going without eating, children are then going to school on sometimes an empty tummy.
Layla Kesson is one of the mums Aber Necessities supports. She has a 2-year-old child and says her energy bills have doubled since the war in Ukraine began, and now she feels trapped.
Until my son goes to nursery, I can't work, so I don't have any other options of getting extra money right now. So it's just leaving me with no choice.
Many people still employed in the oil industry are doing what they can to support struggling families in Aberdeen. But the once steady industry faces upheaval of its own as it balances its need for more energy and its own goals to reach net zero emissions.
This is our state-of-the-art marine simulator, and this is effectively a virtual world in which we can simulate new technologies.
The National Centre for Decommissioning was originally set up to help lower the cost of removing oil rigs from the North Sea, but has since expanded to look at ways the UK can achieve zero emissions goals. This $1 million simulator allows engineers to trial real-time scenarios. One of them involves exploring new ways to put in anchorage systems for offshore wind farms, the kind that now populate the Aberdeenshire coast.
There is still oil in the North Sea, and actually, there'll still be oil left even once decommissioning has finished, because we can't recover 100% of the oil in reservoirs. The question will come down to the political question about energy security versus net zero in terms of the longer term.
Despite its green ambitions, the UK government now wants to increase the number of drilling projects in the North Sea. The belief is that more domestic oil means less of a gap left by embargoes on Russian oil and cheaper energy bills. But at what cost? The Net Zero Technology Centre in the heart of Aberdeen is developing and deploying technologies to provide the UK with affordable zero-emissions energy. Its researchers say there isn't just one pathway to achieving a greener, cheaper future for the country.
So what happens if we have a pathway which is really just driven primarily by wind and green hydrogen, or one which is a bit more modest in terms of the amount of hydrocarbons that we have? All of these pathways are valid, and I think moving from one pathway to the other is actually an issue of how quickly we can deploy the technology and how much investment, that speed of investment and scaling that is required.
But some in the UK take a more militant and disruptive approach. The group Extinction Rebellion says extracting any fossil fuels should be stopped altogether. Others believe the war in Ukraine has provided an opportunity to explore ways out of gas and oil. Dustin Benton of environmental think tank Green Alliance says the UK can easily get off Russian gas if it invests in things like more electric vehicles.
The war in Ukraine isn't caused by climate change, but the solutions to the war in Ukraine are the same as the climate crisis. We need to get out of oil and gas as fast as possible.
But with economists predicting a recession that would drive the cost of living even higher, and politicians facing an increasingly angry electorate, the UK needs to find an alternative, and quickly. So for now, the government is set on increasing drilling in the North Sea, and despite all the odds, the supply ships will keep chugging on towards rigs that are still pumping oil. Next, we head to the United States, which has banned Russian energy imports. The Biden administration was hoping that domestic producers would offset the losses, but even with near record high petrol prices, there's been no frenzied drilling like in cycles past. We'll explain why after the break.
The Biden administration's ban on Russian energy has amplified calls for America to drill, baby, drill. But even with petrol prices hovering near an all-time high, oil production is essentially flat as producers wrestle with a labor shortage, shareholder pressure to pay out dividends, and the threat to significantly phase down the use of fossil fuels. After boring nearly 30 meters underground, it's time to start adding the next drilling pipe to this oil rig. The fresh one swings in from the stockpile, attached with a deftness earned through years of experience. Once in place, the drilling resumes. A drill bit pulverizes layers of sediment as the pipes stack one on top of the other before hitting an oil zone 3 kilometers underground.
We're drilling these wells about 900 feet apart, and they go from here 2 miles in this direction. The resource is incredible.
Mike Eastman is the CEO of Tall City Exploration, a small, privately owned oil and gas company that has 2 rigs drilling nonstop in the Permian Basin, the sprawling oil field straddling Texas and New Mexico. Far below this dusty, arid landscape are the richest oil deposits in the United States. Billions of barrels are still waiting to be pumped from the ground. The U.S. is the world's largest oil producer, ahead of Russia and Saudi Arabia. But most of that oil remains in America. Despite the abundance and a surge in oil prices, U.S. crude production has barely budged since the start of the year and is not forecast to return to pre-pandemic levels until 2023.
A lot of people are wondering, with oil at $100 a barrel, why oil producers
all of them aren't just pumping and drilling and doing as much as they can right now to take advantage of those high numbers?
Well, some are. We are. And I think most of the private companies are going as fast as we could. But people have to realize it's not just a light switch that you turn on.
It takes a good 6 months for most oil companies to significantly boost production. But that time frame is stretching as high inflation dries up costs, leaving companies scrambling to secure more funding. Sourcing essential equipment is also proving difficult as global supply chains fray.
We just had a well over here. We had a problem. We needed a little bit different string of pipe than we had pre-ordered. In the past, that would have been there that afternoon. We had to wait a month.
Despite these headwinds, Eastman expects Tall City's production to nearly double by the end of the year. But while he and other privately held companies go full tilt, publicly traded oil majors are largely holding back.
What's guiding their strategy is investor sentiment above all else. And investor sentiment is all about profitability and returning value to shareholders.
Western energy majors, including Shell, ExxonMobil, and Chevron, are set to return $38 billion to investors this year, nearly double the amount of share buybacks in 2014, when oil last traded above $100 a barrel. This has unleashed sharp rebukes from the White House.
But some companies have been pretty blunt. They don't want to increase supply because Putin's price hike means higher profits.
Subcommittee on Oversight and Investment.
At a hearing on Capitol Hill last month, oil executives defended themselves.
We do not control the market price of crude oil or natural gas, nor of refined products like gasoline and diesel fuel.
Yes or
we
no?
think we can return value to our shareholders, as well as increase production, as well as invest for the future in renewables, low and no carbon fuels for our customers. We will be doing all of that.
Oil companies and their investors see the writing on the wall. The future of energy is green, and investments now may not pay off in the long run.
Because of the messaging.
Todd Staples from the Texas Oil and Gas Association says the industry feels like it's receiving mixed messages from the U.S. president, who has promised to transition America away from fossil fuels.
If the message is, okay, we want oil and gas for the next year, but not the next 40 years, you're not going to see that investment because it takes years to recoup some of those investments to make that realistically possible.
Workers in the oil fields also worry about what a green transition will mean for them.
I've always been in oil.
Matt Cody has worked in the industry for nearly 25 years, riding out its infamous booms and busts as a rig worker and truck driver.
What is it that you love so much about the oil industry?
The oil industry is America to me.
He believes the long-term goal of carbon neutrality is making it difficult to recruit the next generation of workers and to lure the current ones back after mass layoffs during the pandemic.
The Biden-Harris administration wants to ultimately end the oil and gas industry in America, so they're hesitant to run back here and leave whatever stable job they have.
There are roughly 100,000 fewer workers in the oil and gas industry than there were before the pandemic. Some have retired, others have left the industry completely, attracted to more stable and less grueling work. Experts say the labor shortage could derail efforts to significantly ramp up U.S. production. But if America can overcome these challenges to become an oil exporting superpower like Saudi Arabia or Russia, some believe it could mark a new dawn for U.S. influence over global affairs.
One of the things that actually limits the United States' leverage and influence in the world market and in global affairs is the degree to which we participate in the global oil market as a supplier. Why not be the foil where you're helping democratic countries and free economies expand and persevere and prosper as a supplier to those countries?
The global oil industry is at an inflection point. As Russia wages war in Ukraine, many governments and companies are rethinking who they do business with, opening new opportunities for America's oil producers, even as the world's energy mix turns greener.
As the UK and the US shun Russian energy, India is eagerly snapping up its share, taking advantage of steep discounts. Next, we'll take you to the Indian capital, where Russian energy is increasingly powering the economy.
Oil runs India. It powers commuters and cargo across the 3,000-kilometer landmass. So a hike in fuel prices hits at the heart of India's economy. But nobody is hit as hard as India's daily wage earners. BHOORE Singh has been a cab driver for 6 years, and his margins have never been lower. First, the pandemic pared down his earnings. Now, a steep rise in fuel prices has stripped him of his disposable income.
कुछ और भी बिजनेस देखना पड़ेगा जब इसमें भी कुछ नहीं मिल रहा, बचत नहीं हो रही है, सुबह से शाम तक चलाते हैं लेकिन कुछ दो पैसा ना बचे तो फिर क्या फायदा है ऐसी मेहनत से.
Facing challenges at every corner, he's now scaled down his goals for his family.
घर चलाना है, पढ़ाई लिखाई, पढ़ाने का कोई खर्चा हो ही नहीं पा रहा है, बच्चों को अच्छी सी शिक्षा दे ही नहीं पा रहे हैं क्योंकि अच्छी शिक्षा के लिए पैसा चाहिए, खाने पीने के किराए के लिए बस इतना ही होता है, बाकी.
It's been a long day. He's made $40, double what he makes on a regular day. With a family of 4 to support and a 5th on the way, running a household has never been this tough.
हर चीज़ में राशन में देखो इतना महंगाई है, चावल से लेकर आटा, आटा से लेकर तेल, साबुन, सभी में महंगाई है. अब क्या मैं बताएं.
But India needs to keep its economy moving. So while the world shuns Russian oil, India is lapping it up at a discount. India reportedly bought 627,000 barrels of Russian oil a day in April, nearly 20 times more than it did on an average day last year. Experts say the discount of nearly $30 per barrel could ease some of the inflationary burden on the country's poorest, and also provide the country's massive logistics industry with some much-needed stability. India spent nearly $120 billion on crude oil in the previous financial year, and more than 3/4 of India's all oil imports are used by these gas-guzzling trucks in the transport industry. Ensuring sufficient supply to this sector is crucial because it forms the backbone of India's supply chain. At this all-cargo logistics warehouse outside Delhi, 1,000 trucks drop off and pick up cargo every day. Moving nearly 15,000 tons of shipment requires energy, and lots of it. INDER JEET spends 45 hours driving from Delhi to Mumbai nearly every week.
तेल तो हमारे में गाड़ियाँ जब लोड होने से पहले यहीं पे भरवा लेते हैं, उसके बाद वहाँ से चलते हैं तब भरवा लेते हैं. तकरीबन 500-600 लीटर तेल लगता है अप डाउन का ना बॉम्बे तक का सर.
And with tens of thousands of trucks plying the roads every day, the cost of fuel consumption can rack up, making price hikes very costly.
On the domestic transportation business, the express business, that is where we may have a impact temporarily. It could be 3 months, roughly about on the overall cost of the fuel, it may go up by about 5 to 7%.
All Cargo Logistics is one of India's largest logistics firms. With nearly $3 billion in revenue a year, it's well placed to absorb the rising costs. But smaller firms in the industry may not fare well, especially those unable to pass on higher prices to their consumers.
If any company have a long-term contract where there is a freeze in fuel price, whether it goes up or goes down, so those companies can get into some difficulty.
The ones that can pass on the costs will, draining even more money from the country's poorest. This comes at a time when India's fossil fuel dependent economy is seeing its highest inflation rates in 8 years, in large part due to the rise in oil prices. India is hit especially hard because it is reliant on fossil fuels for nearly 3/4 of its energy needs. And importing more Russian oil can only help so much.
It's not that just because they started importing Russian oil, we will be able to take care of imported inflation. It's not that at all, because the bulk of our imports are still from many other sources. Diversification is absolutely important.
Diversifying into battery-powered electric vehicles may be India's best bet to become more energy independent and eventually control fuel-related inflation. Inverted energy is among several private enterprises leading the transition. It makes battery packs for bikes and scooters and small transport vehicles. And recently the demand for them has been relentless, inspiring confidence that an energy revolution is just around the corner.
So we are just at the cusp of technology change, and with petrol and diesel prices going up, and the whole climate change thing becoming an issue. So all these things clubbed together is just pushing us to reach a stage where we start adopting or moving towards electric. So we are at the cusp of the whole change transformation.
Any day now.
Any day now, yeah.
But that's easier said than done. India, like many countries in the world, is dependent on imports for several battery components. The engineers at Inverted Energy are developing some of these components in-house. It's a complex approach, but can help the company and the country answer the burning question of how to power the long-range vehicles of tomorrow. India is pledged to get half of its energy from renewable sources by 2030. It's a tall ask, but it can help India and the world clean up the environment while also limiting the damage caused by climate change. The quest to boost green energy is one that is transcending borders, but it will need strong political will and constant innovation to get to the finish line.